Hello everybody, welcome to Bring It Awesome again. I'm King Bamu, and today we'll be having a deck profile about my Shiranui deck. It's like 95% Shiranui with minor tweaks, so I would like to call it purebred, but it's not really. Purebred with some impurities. There we go. So we're just going to jump right into it with our monster section. We have two Shiranui Swordmaster. I heard this card was complete trash compared to the rest of the support, but it's giving me some great love with its graveyard effect, which is if I control two Shiranui monsters with different names, I can special summon it from the graveyard for free, but I have to banish it when it leaves the field. So basically, it facilitates its second effect, which all Shiranui have one effect, and then it has another effect from when it gets banished. So for Swordmaster, I get to target a zombie monster I control, and it gains 600 attack. So I can use it, well, special summon, go into one of my extra deck monsters, which we'll get to later, and then it would give that monster 600 attack by banishing itself, which I think is great because I don't have to put any extra effort into it. And I keep it at 2 because otherwise it doesn't really do much. I mean, it summons itself from the graveyard, and I have ways of recycling from the banish zone, so it doesn't really need to be any higher. But it's good enough for me to keep it at 2. I have no issues with it. This deck is run, sorry, tongue tie, but it's mostly 2-ofs, so you're going to see 2 Shiranui Smiths. When this card is used as synchro material, so I have to synchro summon, I can add 1 Shiranui card from the deck to my hand. So monsters, spells, and traps, it's a good searcher, but I have to synchro summon for it. So there's that restriction. But I can only add cards from the deck that are not Smith, so I can't call a copy of itself, which is why it's at 2 currently. That and the whole synchro summon restriction. But when it's banished, I can prevent my zombie monsters from being destroyed by battle. So I still take the damage, but my monsters have the extra survivability, and we'll talk about why that's slightly important a little bit later on. But it's a level 4 destruction prevention. I find a use for it slightly. I don't know what else to say because I come across it very rarely, but when I do, it is a valuable asset. Next, we have 2 Solitaire. I would run 3, but I find 2 working just fine because of the recursion and recycle. I get to just bring it back from graveyard, banish zone. So 2 is a magic number for this deck. But basically, I contribute 1 monster, and I get to special summon 1 zombie tuner from my deck with 0 defense, which is basically all the tuners I have in here. But if this card is banished, I get to select 1 banished Shiranui monster, accept itself, and special summon it. But the good part is if I have Shiranui style synthesis, I get to, instead of special summon 1, I can special summon 2. So usually I would have synthesis on when I pop this effect, and I get 2 monsters back, which gives me combo plays at the best, a wall when I at my worst. Integral part of the deck. Next we have Shiranui Samurai, 2-ofs, obviously. When the first iteration of the deck came about, he was my main guy, you know, beat stick. I can banish a monster with his effect while he's on the field. So he was my main banisher, you know, help facilitate those banish effects. He gained 600 attack. I'm trying to read see if I got it right, because I don't remember if it was 600 or 800, but it is 600. My fault, people. That lasts until the end of the turn. When he's banished, I get to add a Shiranui from my graveyard back to my hand. So those tuner monsters, anybody that I don't want to banish, I just want to straight up use on field. In case I get Necro Valleyed, I get to bring those back, so I get a little bit of recycling in that end. So yeah, he still has use despite me having, you know, access to other cards that are just as good, if not slightly better. Next, I'm sorry, just that sounded like a cutoff. But next we have my main lady, question mark, Shiranui Squire. When she's normal summoned, question mark, I get to special summon a Spectral Sword monster from my deck or from my hand. I can only activate this this effect once per turn. When she's banished, I get to draw a card and discard a card. So it helps me put cards in the graveyard. Sometimes I actually want to do that, especially when I have a couple of combo plays, which we'll talk about later on. And the draw might give me that, you know, card I need, either a spell or trap or an extra monster. You know, helps gives me that slight hand filtering that I rarely need, but it's still helpful. It is something I want. The fact that, you know, she's a 1-card synchro summon helps me a lot. So that's why she's at 3. She's the one anomaly in this entire, like, 2-piece monsters list. Oh, I'm sorry. There is another one. Another one. Oh, gosh. So, Shiranui Spirit Master. Again, another anomaly because his effect is so good. When he's normal summoned, I get to special summon a Shiranui monster from my hand or graveyard, but it has its effects negated. So, there's that. His banish effect is probably one of the most potent in the entire archetype. I can target a face-up card my opponent controls, destroy it. So it's removal with, you know, recursion plays. I can use it to give me slight swarm capability to fuel my extra deck, and it works with solitaire. You know, bring back that card that I tributed. You know, it gives me gives me some flexibility with my graveyard. So that's why he's the oddity. He's another one of the oddities that are at 3. Now, for my tuners, I have Shiranui Spectral Sword. He has no effects on field, unfortunately, but his graveyard effect is it makes him a mainstay tuner. What it does is it allows me to banish him and a Shiranui in my graveyard. Well, actually, a zombie in my graveyard, and I get to special summon one synchro monster from my extra deck. It goes to the main monster zone, but the potency of that is, despite this being basically a purebred deck, I get to special summon any monster that has the level requirements. I know that was very poorly worded. So if I were to banish, say, Spectral Sword and Samurai, I get to special summon any zombie level 6 tuner. I'm sorry, level 6 synchro monster. That has a lot of flexibility because I do know that zombies do have a number of synchro monsters with certain summoning restrictions, like needing plague spreading a zombie. This circumvents that. But because they're special summoned, when they go to like the graveyard or the extra deck, they're not properly summoned, so they can't come back. You would have to put them back into the extra deck via numerous methods in order for them to be properly summoned again, for them to be able to be revived. So there's that, but it does give me synchro summoning, essentially pseudo synchro from the graveyard, and that's why he's a mainstay at 3. Next we have Shade. It's a card that's another card that could be targeted with Squire, just like the original Spectral Sword. It's a level 3, so I can work with different numbers as opposed to just with evens and 2s. 2's even though. Crud. Poor wording again. I contribute this card, then target 2 of my banished zombie monsters, except another copy of Shade, and I can special summon them in defense position, but they have their effects negated, so that means I can bring back the Link monster, which we'll get to in a second, but I can bring back just about everybody else, except for the special summon monsters from Spectral Sword, the original, because they were not properly summoned. But it does give me slight swarm, especially when coupled with Solitaire. I would get 4 cards, just about. two from banished, two from banished again, all from like 2 tributes. No, I'm sorry, a tribute and a banish. I think 4 for 2 is pretty good. 3 for 2 minimum. But anyway, so basically that's all he does. I mean, level 3, another target for Squire. Gives me extra cards. Nothing else to be said there. The only oddball I have in my monster section is Samurai Skull. In my playtest, I haven't really used him for much else besides discard fodder, but I put him in originally for his normal summon effect, which allows me to send a zombie monster from my deck to the graveyard. It helps facilitate some plays, not all of them, especially if I'm able to banish right out of the graveyard with some of my card effects, which we'll get to in about a minute. But if this card is sent to the graveyard because of a card effect from my opponent, I can special summon 1 level 4 or lower zombie monster from my deck, except another skull. 2 for consistency's sake. The effects are good. Nothing else to be said there. I mean, he doesn't benefit from being banished, but most of the deck does. And, you know, just being able to send a card to the graveyard to banish does help me a little bit. Especially with Spectral Sword, because Spectral Sword doesn't care if it's Shiranui or not. So I can go into level 6 synchro. So that's why he found a place here. Next, I'm going to go into the traps. We have Shiranui style success. I have 2 of these. Again, even with the spell and trap section, there's going to be a lot of 2-ofs. I can special summon 1 zombie monster from my hand, but banish it when it leaves the field. So when I'm done with it, usually for a synchro summon or, you know, a link play, I can, or even tributing with some of the cards that I use, which we'll get to in a second, I can activate the banish effect right after, which will always be beneficial to me, especially with cards like Solitaire and Spirit Master, or even Squire with the draw and discard. But I can banish this card from the graveyard, and I can target 1 zombie monster I control. So even Samurai Skull benefits from this. It can't be affected by card effects for the rest of the turn, except its own effect. So I don't see that cause benefiting Skull, because it doesn't have an effect that targets itself. But that's beside the point. Most of them don't, but some of them do, especially my extra deck monsters, so I guess it benefits them the most. But I can only activate 1 effect from, success per turn, and only once that turn. So it is a hard once, but its effect is pretty good, especially if I'm pushing for the offensive. Next, I have 2 Shiranui style Samsara. It counts as synthesis when it's on the field, and it has 2 effects. I can either banish or face up zombie type monster from my graveyard, and I don't take battle damage. Actually, it's a zombie monster that I control. Next, I can target 1 that from my graveyard, 2 from my graveyard, sorry, and they have to have 0 defense, and I can shuffle them into the deck and then draw 1 card. So I can recycle banish cards, and I can banish cards that I control already. So it helps with facilitating intricate interactions and combo plays, and it gives me slight hand filtering, especially if I don't have cards to help with the discard for Squire, if anything. Or I just want to bring back cards for the deck in case, you know, they get destroyed, milled out, whatever have you. Especially with cards like Shade and Spectral Sword, which are key components to the deck. Next, we have my main form of removal, Shiranui style Swallow Slash. It's sort of like Icarus Attack, but better for Shiranui, obviously, because it allows me to tribute a Shiranui, actually a zombie type monster. I keep thinking that it's Shiranui restricted, but it isn't, which makes it great generic support. Anyway, I can target 2 cards that are on the field. So my card, my opponent's card, any card, even across the table, and just destroy them. And then after that, subsequently, I can banish a card from my deck. So usually that would be a Shiranui Spirit Master if I'm going for Mass Destruction, or Squire if I'm going for draw, Samurai. it gives me access to banish effects that I can desperately need. Well, not desperately need, but I need for the current situation. So it's adaptable. An adaptable Icarus attack. That would describe it. Next, I have 2 King's Consonants. It allows me to synchro summon legitimately from the graveyard, unlike Spectral Sword. So if I have a Shade and another card, I can just use that, or I can I can use Spectral Sword himself if I don't feel like special summoning. Like, I can just straight up synchro summon, but I have to negate an attack first, so it's a defensive synchro summon. But most of my monsters don't go above level 8 in the extra deck, so I have a lot of targets potentially, and since there's variable levels, going from 2 to 4, I have a lot of options. And that's basically it. There's not much to say about it. 2 seems to work. And next is my retro tech. 1, Pineapple Blast. I normal summon sometimes, most likely with Solitaire or Shade, especially Squire. And when that happens, and my opponent, you know, has a good board and it doesn't get negated, it helps more than evenly matched, I'd like to say. I think that card's slightly overhyped. And my opponent has to prioritize, especially if they have a lot of good cards of equal value. So multiple negation cards that have already been used up. It's at 1. Obviously, it's not that good to be put at 2 or 3, but it's my retro tech for this deck, so that's why it's in here. And that's it for my traps. Next up is my spells. I'm going to have 2 Shiranui style synthesis, the original. The field spell is just as great as everything else, and I don't have to rely on my back row too much for, you know, the name, because Solitaire requires synthesis for its effect to reach its full potential. But when I control no monsters, once per turn, it's a once per turn effect, I can send 1 card, because I've recently come across the distinction between discard and sending cards. I can send 1 card from my hand to the graveyard, zombie monster, and I can activate one of these effects. Actually, it's just 1 card in general. 1 card in general? 1 card in general. Okay. Shut up, you. Anyway, I can target 1 zombie type monster with 0 defense from my graveyard, special summon it. Or I can target 1 banished zombie type monster with 0 defense, again, from my banish zone and move it into the graveyard. I can only use 1 effect per turn, so I can't banish, special summon, you know, I can't loop. So that's why it's at 2. I don't need 3 because I have multiple cards that can act as Shiranui style synthesis. For example, Solemnity. There we go. I'm working on it. Anyway, its name becomes Shiranui style synthesis while it's in the spell and trap card zone. Once per turn, I can activate 1 of these effects. I can banish 1 zombie monster from my graveyard. I prevent my normal and special summons from being negated, which helps if I'm doing multiples of those. Specifically when I go into my Spectral Sword plays with this with the synchro summoning, and my going into my Link monster, which we'll introduce in about a minute or 2. And I can target 1 monster that I control, I can banish it, and I can send 1 zombie monster with 0 defense from my deck to the graveyard. That helps if I need something to accompany Spectral Sword, or Spectral Sword himself to go in. Or I can just set up for next turn where I can send a card to the graveyard that can be banished later. Or at that particular moment with another card, I can just set it up. This deck has a small, I think, curve that makes it require setup, but it sort of pilots itself after a while. Next we have Ghost Meets Girl, a Shiranui story. It came in the new Savage Strike support. It allows me to discard a zombie monster in order to special summon a Shiranui monster with a different name from my deck or graveyard. And my opponent has a control monster, which sucks a little bit. But to be able to special summon, if I discard Samurai Skull, which is what I usually do, I get to special summon any Shiranui monster. So that helps me with my plays for the most part. I think it's a good offset. I'm locked to only zombie monsters, special summon wise, but the whole deck's zombie, so it doesn't really matter. I can only use one per turn, so that's why 2 is... I'm sorry for repeating magic number for me. I apologize dearly, but it is the magic number for me. Next, we have 1 Burial from a Different Dimension. There's a lot of cards that allow me to bring back Shiranui cards from the Banner Zone. But this card just lets me do it a little bit faster by giving me 3 cards at a time at the same time. So yeah, that's why I usually just have 1. I don't need anything else because I have other methods. It's just this is when I do the whole group deal thing that I usually do. Rarely often. Really? It's rarely often. I'm not even sure if that's actually a thing, but it's a thing. Next is Foolish Burial. I might take this deck card out because it works, but I feel like I can do I can put in a better card for it. I put it in to get my Spectral Sword plays going off a little bit faster by sending 2 cards instead of 1, but that's only if I, summon Samurai Skull or a similar card and just get that going. But I only used it once or twice in our playtest so far, so it's a good tech, but not the best. So, yep, might be there, might not. Stay tuned for the update. Next, last but not least, our latest and greatest, my extra deck. This is my bread and butter. Not really, but you get the gist. So we have 2 Sword Saga. Yep, Grandpa Shaman King. But yeah, I can only special summon him once per turn. So even if I could use Spectral Sword, which I forgot to mention is a once per turn, obviously because I only have 1 main special extra monster zone. I kept going between special and extra. I don't know why. I can, when it's special summoned, I get to target 1 monster on the field and change its battle position, which doesn't work against Lynx for obvious reasons, but it does help me get across certain beat sticks. With lower defense than attack, I can usually try to swing over that. Or if there's a person, my opponent decides to set up a wall, I can just smack the weakest monster and by putting it in attack position. So he does have use. Just he's overshadowed by some of my other cards in terms of my go-to. But his banish effect allows me to get a token. I don't really use his effect at all. I don't use that banish effect because the token really doesn't do much. It's a level 1. Oh gosh, it's even worse than I thought. That's just how much I don't use the effect. But basically, I use him with Shade to summon Shogun, which we'll introduce in like 30 seconds, maybe. And basically that's it. That's all I use them for. That and the curl them up effect. Next we have Samurai Saga. He's the easiest card for me to special summon with Spectral Sword. There's not really much else for me to use him for, because I use him with Spectral Sword again in order to go into Shogun if I don't use Sword Saga. But what he does is, during either player's battle phase, I usually use it in the battle phase, I get to return a banished I get to, no, I'm sorry. I get to shuffle a banished zombie monster inside of my, well, zombie tuner and zombie synchro. God darn it. from my banished zone, and I get to change the battle position of all monsters my opponent controls with attack less than or equal to that monster's attack. There's not that many strong targets at the early stages of the game. I feel like, well, there's not that many strong targets that I would have at that stage of the game where that effect would actually be like worth it. But I usually use him for his second effect because I'm banishing him with a Spectral Sword, which would be to drop a monster's attack by 500. So that's usually what I use him for. That and the ease of summoning. So that's why he's at 3 compared to Sword Saga, who's at 2. Next we have Shiranui Squire Saga. I used her in the initial playtest. I haven't used her recently. I feel like going the even route beats Squire Saga's level 4 shade. I feel like it outweighs that. But anyway, so basically I get to banish a face-up monster I control or that's in my graveyard, and depending on what it is, I can activate her 3 effects in sequence. So I can have all monsters gain 300 attack if I banish a zombie. Mandatory. Basically, if I activate this effect, it's mandatory. Fire, I can destroy 1 spell trap on the field. Synchro, I can destroy 1 monster on the field. So basically, later in the game, when I have a more fuller graveyard, I prefer not to use the cards that's on the field. She will get all 3 of these effects because I'll be just banishing all of my synchros because they're special summoned, rarely synchro summoned. So I can't bring them back. So they might as well just go to the banish zone. At least I'll get their effects. If anything, banish Spirit Master. I would get utility out of her for freaking max. She has 2100 attack, which isn't that strong, especially for a level 7. But the fact that she would go up to 300 and I would destroy a spell and trap because it's all fire tuners. The only thing that I would be missing if I were to, worst case, would be to destroy 1 monster on the field. And I would, with cards like Swallow Slash and the attack buff from Sword Master, I would still hit that gap either way. And I have stronger monsters if, you know, destroying a monster would be that big a deal. Next, I have Shogun Saga. So he's my average big boss. I would get him with Spectral Sword and Samurai usually, or King's Consonants. Either way works. What he does is, when he's special summoned, I get to banish a... Is it Shiranui locked? Yay! He is not. He's zombie locked, which means he's not locked. Freedom for all undead. But anyway, I get to banish a zombie monster from my graveyard, and he gains attack equal to the original attack of that zombie. So he's 3000. He gets very huge if I even take out a Spirit Master. At the very least, I would get rid of a Smith just to get rid of the battle destruction. So that way he would be at 4000 and he can hit a lot of people. But usually when, unlike the rest of the Shiranuis, he's an oddball. He has a destroyed by battle or card effect clause instead of a banish clause. So he gets to... I'm sorry, it's been a while since I used the destroyed effect, unfortunately. I get to target one of my banished zombie monsters with 0 defense and return it to the graveyard. Wow, that's not really powerful at all. I never get to use it. So it usually gets banished, bounced back to the hand, or used for synchro material. Or link summon. Or the game I just win the game, basically. So I don't get to use that effect at all. So yeah, there's that. Huge beat stick. Go to when I push for the offensive. But in the event that I were to find the need to push past my barriers, to break my limits, I get a magic horse. Shiranui Sun Saga. So what he does is, upon being special summoned, by the way, he's 3,500. He's my second strongest monster because Sun Saga can easily go past 4,000. What Sun Saga does is, when he hits the board via special summon, I get to put all Shiranui synchro monsters, basically zombie synchro monsters, but I say Shiranui because it's purebred. I get from my graveyard and banner zone, put them into the extra deck, and I get to destroy I get to destroy cards on the field that my opponent controls, typically. Equal to, not less than, not up to, equal to the number of cards I return. So if my opponent has 4 cards, I can't banish 5. I have to banish 4 or less. It's to destroy 4 or less. So basically, he's a late game ender, board clear, late game. If Shogun Saga doesn't do the job, Sun Saga does. His horse tramples over people compared to sword stabbing people. That's how I see it. Trample, trample, trample. So there goes Sun Saga. Last but not least, Skills Saga Supremacy. She came out in the latest support also. Basically, when I do get to Swarm, Solitaire, Spirit Master, those guys, they all help me with swarming. I get to go into Supremacy. So basically, synchro monsters I control can't be destroyed by card effects. So she can still get Dark Hold, unfortunately. But fire monsters I control, including herself, can't be destroyed by battle. Once per turn during my opponent's turn, I can take a card, banished, zombie, synchro, and special summon to a zone she points to. She has a zone pointing down, up, and left. My left. Cool. I'm not digging the up arrow, but it's okay. It's a-okay. Because usually my opponent is gonna abuse it one way or another. She gets targeted for everything. So I just put her in the main monster zone afterwards, which she's cool. Because she doesn't have any defense, I can't bring her back through traditional means. So usually I just I find a way to recycle her and then bring her out all over again, or I just summon a new one. That's why she's at 3. And yeah, she protects all my special summon monsters from, hitting the graveyard too early. I can use them for other things. And she's an alternative to Synchro Hate. And she puts cards into the main monster section prematurely, so that helps. And that wraps up my Shiranui deck. I hope you guys liked it. I apologize for rambling on with utter nonsense. Please subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment down below. I would like to hear your thoughts about the deck. And we will see you when we come out with more content. This is Bring It Awesome, King Bambu.